This is an exclusive SBR college football season win totals update. We have the bookmaker at the South Point Hotel and Casino, Chris Andrews, who is a trailblazer in the business, setting season win totals on all 130 college football teams. Chris, thanks for joining us. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Like I said, it's always a pleasure talking to you guys. SBR has always been very good to me, and I'm glad to return the favor.
Well, make sure to give Chris a follow on Twitter. You can follow him at Andrews Sports on Twitter. And if you're in Las Vegas, stop by the South Point Hotel and Casino. Say hello. They got a great setup there, great atmosphere, a great place to place your bets and watch the games. But Chris, just got a few questions for you to do with college football, which we know you know very well. So was wondering, can you take us into the room, maybe conceptually speaking, on how you go about setting these season win totals for all 130 teams?
Well, I'd like to say I start in February, but the truth is I probably start the year before. I have a methodology that I use. I've always said I hate to call it a math model because mathematicians would laugh at me. It's not really that. But I have a way of charting, players and performance and all that sort of thing. So the first thing I start looking at last year, how they performed. And by the way, if you're going to do that, don't just take the year-end numbers. You know, those can tell you a lot, but they can also be kind of confusing. I look at like the weekly numbers and how they stack up. And, from there, I see who's coming back production-wise, quarterbacks and skill position players, but also like to look at the offensive line. I think that's always something that's greatly overlooked. On the other side of the ball, it's hard to say one position is more important than any other defensively. So I want to get a good idea of who's coming back. And in our other segment, we talked about some injuries. So I'd like to see, how did the team stack up during the course of the year? Did they suffer a lot of injuries? Were they relatively healthy? Things like that.
Okay, and like into the room, if you could take us into the room with you, is it like you yourself? Do you have 3 or 4 guys? Do certain people concentrate on certain conferences? Anything like that?
In the beginning, it's just me. I don't want to hear really from anybody else. I just want to think to myself. I have like I said, my own methodology to a certain point. So I get my own ideas on how I power rate each team. Now, from that point on, I'm starting to open myself up to outside information, whether it's sports writers, whether it's other people in our business. Then I start to gather information outside of just my own brain. And from that point, I try to put it all together. So naturally, I have my own biases. Some are good, some are not that good, but everybody has those too. So you just try to, like I said, you read, you talk. I try to get into discussions with other guys who really do love college football and follow it as closely as I do. And, you're always going to glean a little something from someone else that you haven't thought of, or maybe somebody knows about a transfer or an injury or something like that has a material effect on how you're going to evaluate that team for the coming year. So, like I said, I try to do as much as I can on my own. Then I open it up to everyone, to other people.
Okay. That's well put. I mean, talking to other sharp minds in college football, that makes sense because a lot of the guys will kind of black out everything around them and put a number on a team and then come back to it a little bit later. So it sounds pretty similar to what you do.
Yeah, that sounds exactly what I do. And then I have a program I've developed over the years, which may be part of something that's going to be for sale this year. We'll see how that works out. But anyway, I have a program I've worked out over the years where I plug in every team, into their schedule, my power rating for that team. And obviously, I have to have their opponents, including FCS teams, that I have to create a rating for them as well. And this program will give me, using those power ratings, will give me a point spread, a money line, and then a win probability for each game that they play. At that point, it's, relatively simple. I just kind of add up whatever it is, and I'm looking at some of my notes, and let's just take, first team in alphabetically, Air Force. It comes to 4.675. My computer goes out forever. So essentially like 4.7 wins, for Air Force. Now, what's that? You can't put up 4.7. It's either 4 or 4.5 or 5, So there, you kind of look a little more closely. Like, is there any scheduling quirks that are going to help them or hurt them? When do they play Army and Navy? Those are always big games, even though Air Force is in a conference. And from there, you just kind of, start looking at it, and the computer's done your basic work for you, but it's still going to take you a couple of days to go through each and every team and convert that computer number into a bettable number for you to put on your board.
Yeah, interesting. So it's a little analytics and then a little of what you think, and you just pop out a number. So that makes sense. But looking at the numbers, I guess we're pretty early on since when you released the college football season win totals. But year over year, are you seeing growth? Do you forecast, tickets written in amount of dollars? Do you see it higher this year than last year?
Well, last year we put it out. We wrote about $1 million, which, quite a few bets at, we put once we get a little closer to the start of the season, we expand the limits. But to open, we only take a dime, and I know that's a small bet for some guys. It's a big bet for others, but that's what we take. And if I was only using Power 5 teams, I'm sure I would take a lot more than that. But, we take a dime, and that goes from, Ohio State all the way down to Ball State, so we run the whole gamut. But last year we wrote about $1 million. And this year we're only a couple weeks in, and we're already over 200,000 in handle. So that's a lot of dime bets, and I think we'll exceed last year. We're certainly well ahead of last year's pace, and I think we'll wind up well over $1 million this year. But it's fun, and we try to keep it. We try to keep it as balanced as we can. But as I said, as we get a little closer to the start of the actual season, we'll expand our limits, certainly for Power 5 teams, and even probably for some of the lower echelon teams as well.
Okay, and to put it in comparison for the viewers, I guess that $1 million or the 200,000 that you've written so far, to compare that to the Game of the Year lines or the Week 1 lines, is that more or less than those?
Geez, last year, Week 1 lines, before the start of the season, as you close those up like a week before the start of the season, probably right about $1 million there too, which I think was pretty good because, guys are betting before a general line comes out. You know how a lot of guys are. They hate to use their opinion unless they can see two other lines, or another line, I should say. So that was probably pretty close. And games of the year, we don't write quite as much on those. We get a couple of, we get some decent play. I don't want to put a number on it because honestly I don't know what it is, but we get good play on that. But those are one of those things where, a guy kind of hates to make an opinion on a game in October or November, where he may be taking 6-7 points, the worst of it, by the time they kick off on that Saturday 6-7 weeks in the future. So right, yeah, you got to be a pretty sharp guy with a pretty big bankroll to allow somebody else to hold your money for that long. So. We do. I'm happy with the business we do on the games of the year, but it's not as much as season win totals or what we wind up doing on the Week 1 numbers.
Okay, and Chris, I know you're not a big fan of setting a number to get the same amount of bets money-wise on each side. You're more about putting the number out that's the correct number on that team or on that game. Is that correct?
Yeah, very good. I'm glad you paid attention when I talked. Yeah, so that's
Absolutely. But
awesome.
would you say that you have to shade some of these numbers as far as season win totals for maybe, say, UNLV or UNR, Arizona State, or USC, where you'll see more traffic in your sports book from those surrounding schools?
I don't. Maybe, a nickel here or there on certain schools but only like if you're debating between two numbers. Like if I made, let's say USC, what did I make them this year? I made them a solid 10. Uh, I didn't shade them to 10 over or anything like that because, we get a lot of USC people, including Michael Gaughan, who was a graduate of USC. But that was my number. I opened that, and I'm glad I did because that's one of the games we've actually gotten bet pretty strongly on the under from wise guys. So, like I said, if you're debating between two numbers, sometimes I'll let that influence me, like what I think the public's going to bet. But ordinarily, I just try to come up with the right number, and let the public, let the bettors go from there.
And just a couple questions on as far as numbers go, and just to throw it out there to you, I'm down here in San Jose, Costa Rica. So as far as updated numbers, I actually found it hard to find, for instance, what today's number you have on these college football teams. So if you know of a way for people not in your sports book to see them, is there a way, Chris, or no, you have to go to
I'll put you on the media list. Just talk to me after we end this broadcast. But I can't update it every day. We really just have too many moves. But I update every Monday and send it out. And the thing is, it's hard to put on your sheet, current line, because by the time you print that sheet, that current line might not be the current line anymore. So really at this point in time, technologically, there's just no way for me to show it on a real-time basis. But I'll put you on our Monday media list. You get an update every Monday.
Okay, that makes sense, and I'll follow up with you after this. But a couple questions about the actual numbers. I guess comparing to my numbers to your all's numbers, I felt that you had a little bit of an add-on to teams returning their starting quarterback. Now, I know the market takes that into effect, but I felt like just looking at a couple teams, App State at 9.5, UCF 7.5, FSU 9.5, even like smaller teams, Georgia State at 6, Miami of Ohio at 8, Wyoming at 8, Troy at 8.5, and like you said, USC at 10. Did you feel in the early betting you got bet on some of those teams towards the under? Or am I on to anything as far as you really valuing returning starting quarterback maybe more than the market?
That's probably a fair assessment. I definitely look at the starting quarterback, but depending on how good he was, of course, So I think I probably I have that pretty strongly in my numbers. But I've seen it kind of go both ways. Where some guys don't think it's that important, and other guys think it's very important. I think the way football is in this day and age, your starting quarterback returning, as long as he's returning with that same coach, I think that means an awful lot. But of course, I'd like to look at the rest of the offense, and as I said, particularly the offensive line is something that's that's really important for a team, because I believe that football really starts at the line of scrimmage, even in this day and age where the skill position players are more and more important every year. But I think that's probably fair. I rate the returning quarterback very highly.
No, and it makes sense. It has a lot to do. A proven quarterback in college football can take you a long way. So that makes sense. But I guess just getting to some of the big boys, on your number of Alabama, Bama has not lost multiple regular season games since 2010, I believe. You got them priced at 10.5, or yes, is that the current number you got them at?
Yeah.
10.5. So they would have to lose multiple regular season games to hit that under. Does that make you a little bit nervous, or maybe why you set them at 10.5 instead of 11?
Well, I think when you let me find exactly where I got my on. Okay, first of all, I'm at 10.5 over $1.45. Now, usually I don't like to go that high with the money. I like to move the number at that point. But if you go to 11 with Alabama, okay, the only guy going to bet you over, what's he betting you? Betting you that Bama's going undefeated, right? No wise guys are going to bet you that. If you put up 11, you have just sent an invitation to every wise guy in Las Vegas to come in and bet you under. And that's just the way it's going to be. Right, wrong, indifferent. I'm just telling you exactly what you're going to get. So I'd rather juice it up pretty good. And if guys bet me over 10.5 and lay that $1.45, and if they win, I'll pat them on the back and say, good job. But
no, that makes sense. That's great stuff for the listeners of why that number is the way it is from your side of the counter. Because that's
yeah, like when we get down to like any number below that, you won't see the juice get that high. I'll move it half a game before then. But like I said, at 11, it's just a one-way bet for the wise guys. You'll get some squares in public betting you over the 11, but no wise guy in his right mind would ever bet you over the 11. Just won't happen.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that, Chris. I got one for you in the question that I have here. I guess you'll see which side of the coin I'm on with this team. But it's a well-coached team returning their quarterback, and I believe you guys got it set a little too low, at least from the opening numbers. That's the Utah Utes at 5.5.
Yeah.
Not sure what you got them at now, but just looking down at their schedule, extra time before BYU, a bye before Stanford, outside of USC and the two Washington schools, they should be competitively priced, if not favored, in every game. They won 9+ games the last 3 years. Kyle Whittingham brings in a new OC, Troy Taylor from Eastern Washington, who we know they were the most prolific passing team last year. So interested in your assessment of 5.5 on the Utah Utes.
Well,
I know I'm putting you on the spot there, but one thing I could think about is the offensive line that you brought up.
Well, there you go. By the way, the public greatly agrees with you. That's one of the ones we got bet pretty strongly on Utah. I opened it at 5.5. I'm at 6 over 15. Now, to the general public, that doesn't sound like a very big move, but believe me, that's a pretty big move. So, yeah, you're right. They don't have that much coming back on their offensive line, and I think Whittingham is a pretty good coach. I have a lot of respect for the program. I think they've been a pretty good road team or home team. Looking here in my notes, I give them a 5 for home field, which I gave two teams a 5.5. I give them a 5, so they are very high up there as among the very strongest home field advantages in college football. But all that being said, I did lower them 3 points off of where they finished last year in my power ratings. And when you throw them into the computer, they have a pretty tough schedule. You mentioned some nuances in the schedule. I may have missed that, to be perfectly honest with you. But also that Pac-12, you got a tough game every week. Then you throw in some of their out-of-conference stuff that I have here somewhere. It might take me a minute or so to find it, but BYU being one of them. But
BYU, and you're right. I mean, the Pac-12 is going to be good. And they pull, I believe, from their cross division. They got both Washington schools, which we know Washington State's going to be improved. So, no, you make a great point. There's two ways to look at it. It is interesting that it was bet up a little bit, though.
Yeah, it did get bet up, but I do have their schedule right here. They got North Dakota and San Jose State, two pretty easy wins, but they play at USC. That's going to be tough. They play Stanford, at Arizona, and I actually have them a favorite at Arizona. I don't think Arizona's going to be very good. Washington and Washington State, UCLA, Oregon, who I think is a team a lot of guys think is going to be greatly improved this year. We'll see, I guess. And yeah, it's just one of those where my computer spit out like a 5.5 for their number of wins. And, I went back and looked, and I thought that was probably pretty close to the number, so that's what I opened at 5.5. But the money definitely showed on the over. So are you from Utah, or is that just one of the sides you happen to like?
No, it was just one of the sides I happen to like. I'm actually from Florida, and I got a question on Florida and also Michigan.
Okay.
Florida's lined at 8, and it looks like they got at Kentucky, at Missouri, and at South Carolina. Those are their 3 away games. And for an SEC team, it doesn't get much easier than those 3 games as your away games. The teams they get at home, Tennessee, LSU, they also get Florida State at home. They might be an underdog there. That will be an interesting one. So they're lined at 8. My question is, Malik Zaire, not sure exactly what's going to happen if he's going to start, but does that affect your number on the Florida Gators?
Yeah, it actually had me raise it a little bit because they really came in a little less than that. They only have 5 starters coming back on defense. Again, pretty strong home team. Georgia's a neutral, of course. At Missouri, at South Carolina, at Kentucky. I think Kentucky's going to probably be pretty good. Just again, they got Michigan. That's going to be a tough game. Tennessee, I think they'll be favored over Tennessee, but pretty tough game. At Kentucky, I have them only a slight favorite at Kentucky. Then they play Vandy. They should win. LSU, I got them a slight dog against LSU. They play A&M. I got them a slight favorite there. So still, it's not a horrible schedule for an SEC team, but I just don't think they're that great of a team right now that I would put them in the upper echelon. They're probably in the upper half of the SEC. But in all honesty, the SEC wasn't all that good last year. So I think that they're one of the question marks. And, again, they were very, very difficult for me to handicap. I think there's a lot of question marks for Florida. But, of course, when I say question marks, usually people mean that in a negative connotation. And I try to mean that in a negative or a positive. I'm not sure which way Florida is going to go this year. They were very difficult for me to evaluate.
Yeah, it's an interesting handicap for sure, Chris. And you bring up a good point with at Kentucky. I need to backtrack there. That's not that easy of a game there in Lexington. So
I think it's going to be pretty good this year. I got them quite a bit better than last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And to piggyback off of that, do you see any reverse correlation in somebody betting on Florida and maybe against Michigan, knowing that in the season win totals, knowing that they play each other week 1 there in Arlington, so 2 big fan bases maybe coming in, and if somebody does bet on Florida, they bet against Michigan or anything like that?
I see a little bit of a correlation there, but I think I think you may be overthinking that a little bit. I personally think Michigan's going to be down this year, but meanwhile, Michigan's one of the big movers for me. A lot of people bet over on Michigan. They bet them season win totals. They bet them in games of the year. Bet them a little bit on this first week game. But although I have to say I've had pretty good two-way action on that. But I think they'll be down a little this year. But I think it's. That's another one of those question mark teams. Jim Harbaugh's recruited extremely well, but they've lost an awful lot. And I have the utmost respect for Jim Harbaugh, but there are times when he hasn't had great teams. Most of the time they have been, but he's thrown a few clinkers in there when he hasn't had the personnel behind him. And just because you recruit well doesn't always mean you're going to have a great team. And I think you could see that with certain teams get coached up, and other teams kind of fall flat, even though they have great recruiting numbers. And it'd be interesting to see what happens with Michigan this year, because I think overall the Big Ten isn't all that strong, but the upper half of the Big Ten is very strong.
Yeah, the Big Ten was improved last year. And looking at Michigan's schedule, they got at Indiana, at Penn State, at Whiskey, at Maryland. They do get Ohio State and Sparty at home along with Minnesota. So that's also an interesting handicap, in my opinion, with the Big Ten getting better.
It's still a pretty tough schedule, I got to tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. But moving out to the Pac-12, we touched on them a little bit. The USC Trojans. Do you still have them lined at 10?
I'm at 10 under 35.
Okay, so you have gotten a little under money, and that makes sense. I know they get their first 3 games at home. They're returning Sam Darnold, kind of the media flair. They're kind of sexy for the public media there. But when you look at their schedule, 2 separate back-to-back road trips, at Cal, then at Washington State. That Washington State game, watch out there. Then they also have another one late in the season at Notre Dame and at ASU. So there are some negatives with USC. It's interesting to see it take some under money. I kind of agree with that, Chris. Do you think that under might be a good bet going forward?
Well, I kind of think it is. It's funny you mentioned that because that was one of the teams, as I was looking at USC, I'm thinking to myself, I said, I probably have them rated lower than most guys and most of your casual fans. And when I put out the number, my computer, by the program, still spit out at 10. See if I can find exactly what it is. Okay, my computer spit out a 9.9. So I wound up lining it at 10 flat because I thought, we would have some public money on the over and that sort of thing. But the sharp guys have come in on the under. And I have to say, even though it was me that put out the number, I think the sharp guys have this one right. I think they're going to be down. I think they're not going to be – I don't want to say they're going to be down because they could easily win this Pac-10 and they could easily wind up in the college football playoffs and win it. But I think they'll be a little disappointing to people. And I think if you're looking to bet against a team on an individual game basis, that's a team you might want to keep an eye on because I have a feeling their lines are going to be a little inflated this year because I think the general public will be very much behind them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Chris. I guess just lastly, what was the most difficult team to put a season win total out, and do you have a favorite bet?
I do have a favorite bet, a team that I think is going to be pretty good this year. Real sleeper for you, Troy State. I think Troy is going to be one of those good teams. It's quite a bit better than last year. And they got a new coach, I think 2 years ago. But I think they got the right guy in the right place. And a lot of times you see some of these southern schools, man, you get kids that maybe aren't quite good enough to play in the SEC, but they are good enough to play for a Sun Belt team. And I think Troy State is going to be pretty good. Watch out for them. Their first game, they go up to Boise. And when I put it out, I can't remember the exact number I put out, but I greatly favored Troy in that game, and all the money's come in on Boise, and I was more than happy to take that action.
The number was around 5, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think I got bet up to 8, something like that. I like Troy. I think Troy's going to be a good team, so keep an eye on them. That's an outfit that I would keep an eye on. Another one I would say Wyoming. I think Wyoming is going to be pretty good. Keep an eye on them. I think that's a pretty good team, and they have a very tough schedule. I think you'll be catching points with them in a lot of different games, and that might not be the worst way to go. Some of the ones that I thought were pretty tough, man, they're all tough. I think Illinois was a tough one for me because I like second-year coaches, and I like Lovie Smith a lot. I think eventually he'll be good. But, man, that program's just a bad program right now. And I didn't raise them in my power ratings very much, and I think they're going to have a very tough year. And they got a kid, Dudek. I don't know if you remember him. 2 years ago, was really good. Just a little kind of a Wes Welker type receiver. Really explosive kid. Missed all the last year with a knee injury. Supposed to be back. The last I've heard is he looked pretty good in practice. If that kid comes back, that could mean an awful lot for Illinois. But, sometimes these guys never come back from those knee injuries. So, keep an eye on that. Illinois was a very tough one for me to make, because they are in that Big Ten, too. You never know, if that war of attrition really starts wearing them out at the end of the season, that's going to probably cost them, a couple games here and there, and they're not very good in the first place anyway. So that was probably my toughest one, but I could go up and down the list. There's probably a whole bunch of tough ones.
Yeah, you got a tough job setting season win totals, but I like your Troy State analysis there. What Neil Brown, the coach, he came over, he was the OC at Kentucky, likes to throw the ball around. And you pointed out, I think their quarterback's name is Brandon Silvers.
I think you're right.
Yeah, Panhandle of Florida, under-recruited, but he can really sling it. So we could see Troy State put up some big offensive numbers. And they got some big boys on that defensive line, so they could get after the quarterback. It will be a tough trip up there to Boise State, though. I know Lafayette had a lot of trouble week 1 heading up there, kind of got blown out. But Troy State's a different squad, so I think you might be onto something, Chris.
Well, that's one of my teams. Them and Wyoming, those are the two that I kind of have my eye on. Like I said, catching points. If they start, blowing teams out and they're going to be a favorite later in the year, you might want to back off. But catching points, I think you'll see them in some pretty live dog situations.
Yeah, and both of them have 2 good quarterbacks, so that's
yeah, absolutely. And good coaches too.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 great coaches. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And please, if you like the content, we'll get Chris back on. Please give us a like, the thumbs up button there on your screen, and make sure to give Chris a follow on Twitter @AndrewSports. And if you're in Las Vegas, make sure to stop by the South Point Hotel and Casino. Say hello to them. They got a great atmosphere, a great place to watch the game and place your bets. So for Chris Andrews, I'm Drew Martin. Thanks for tuning in.